Hi everyone, welcome to day 26, and today we are going to learn about error boundaries, useReducer, and useContext. I hope you guys are excited for these sessions as I am in teaching you guys. So let's get started with today's session. Okay, so what we will be doing is we'll be learning about error boundaries. So let's understand the concept and the need for that. So suppose you have a component which is, which has some error inside it. So let's create such a component. All right. So you'll create a component function breaker. Okay. So this is a component which is, breaking our functionality. And what we will do is we will make use of this, paste this here. We'll create basically uh, a counter component, and once the count goes beyond 2, right, the it should throw an error. So let's create such a component. So we are going to return a button, and we are going to return a count. Okay, and what we will do is when we click on this button, we will say handle click. Let's define the handle click function, and here what we will do is we will say set count. We will check what is the previous value. Okay, if previous is greater than 2, we will throw an error. Okay, this is not something that you do just for the purpose of demonstrating an error boundary. We are building something like this. All right, so we'll say throw new error, and we'll pass a message, boom. Okay, so let's use this. All right, and otherwise what we will do is we'll just return whatever was the previous count, we'll add 1 to it. All right, and let's add the breaker here, and let's create another component which is basically doing something else. So function another component, and we'll just say return h1 doing component for displaying some other info. All right, so we have these two components, another component and the component which basically breaks things. Okay, let's take a look at what happens. All right, so we have this component which is the breaker component. Let me click on this. So I'm clicking on it once, it has increased the count by 1, and I'm clicking on it again, it has again set the count to 2. Now let me click on it again, uh, and you can see once the count has become greater than 2, right? So when the count became 3, that is when it threw this error. Whenever the previous count was greater than 2, right, it threw that error, and we can see this in the logs over here. Let me zoom this for you guys. So we can see that error occurred in breaker, and this was the error boom which we had written, right? And it's telling us from where the error came and how it occurred, right? All of that. But what is happening right now is, you consider this scenario where we have, maybe 10 components or 20 components or maybe 100 components. The error is happening inside this breaker component, and it's affecting the entire app. You cannot see anything. So how do we gracefully handle such a scenario where only the part which is breaking, that is handled, right? And rest of the things, they are working. So how do we gracefully handle errors within components? So for that purpose, we have something known as error boundary. So let's take a look at how we can create one. All right. So in order to create a error boundary, we need to use class-based components because it's not possible to do it yet using functional components. So let's create one. So we have class error boundary. It extends a component which is coming from React. Okay, all right. And what we will do is, we will create a state, and we will say that initially the error is null. Okay, there are no errors, and we have a special method, static method, get derived state from error. All right. So whenever an error occurs within a React application, and you have a error boundary component available, right? So this function gets called with a special object which is the error, okay, which contains the error information. And what we want to do is we want to return that error basically. All right. And then we will provide the render function, and what we will do is, uh, whatever we are returning over here, this will be set to the state object. All right. So this is the purpose of that, doing it like this. And then what we will do is we'll get the error from the state, okay, and we will check if error is there. We will do something. Otherwise, what we will do is we'll just say, we don't even need to write an else. Actually, we can just say return this dot um, props dot children. So if you remember, all components have a special property known as children. If you go back to our first session on React, where we were creating elements using react.createElement API, there was a special property known as children, right? So whatever um, elements we wanted to show inside a particular component, they we were passing those as children, right? So each React component, whether it's functional or class based, has a special property known as children. So we'll take a look at this in just a bit in case it's still not clear to you. Let's handle this scenario. So what we will do here is you'll say return, and we'll return a div, and which will have this pre tag, and here we are going to say error dot message. Okay, uh, because if you take a look at this, where is it, the breaker component, we are creating a instance of the error class, right, which is getting a message. So whenever an error occurs, we are returning the message property of it inside this. Otherwise you will just render the children. Now the way we are going to use this is we are going to wrap this component which we expect, which might break, right? So we will wrap that component inside the error boundary, and we'll do it like this. All right, and let's go back to our code. Let's do a refresh, and I'm clicking on this button, clicking on it again, and once I click on it a fourth time, this component should break. Okay, and you can see that this component has break-in. I mean, it broke basically, and instead of uh, everything becoming blank, we are seeing the error handling message. Okay, and our other component is intact. Okay, so we are still able to see the error message in the console so that we can rectify the error. But to the user is no longer getting a blank screen, whereas earlier they were getting a blank screen, right? So this is the benefit of using error boundary. It allows you to handle errors within your React components gracefully. All right, and another thing that we can do is we can have error boundaries at multiple levels. So suppose we create an error boundary which is at the level of the app. Okay, the entire app is wrapped inside this error boundary. So let me click on it another time. Now this time you see that everything that the app was rendering, that was replaced by the error message that we are showing. And this is how the behavior is when you define an error boundary at the level of the app. We can have multiple error boundaries. Suppose we have an error boundary just for the breaker component, right? And now when this component breaks, right? So since this error boundary is closest to this component, this is handling that error. And in case any other error happens, for example some error happens within this component, this error boundary would take care of it. So you can have different error boundaries depending on the errors that you're trying to handle, and you can have different error boundaries based on at different levels within your React application. Okay, so this is how you can handle errors. um, Another thing that we can do is we can provide a fallback component for our error boundary. So let's do that. So we'll say function fallback component, and what this will do is we'll just say return, and here we are going to say div, and this will have a paragraph, something went wrong, and we will have another let's use the pre tag, and here we are going to say error dot message, and this component accepts error as a prop. Okay, and in order to make this work, what we will do is if there is an error, instead of returning this, now we will say return this dot. So before we use it, we will say over here fallback component equals error, what did we call this? Yeah, fallback component. All right, and here we are going to say when there's an error, we will say this dot, not global, this dot props dot fallback component. All right, and error, since this fallback component accepts an error, we will pass the error object to it, and we will close this. So you this is a special way by which you can access the properties and render a component over here. You can say this dot props dot fallback component. So this is allowed within class based components, right? And if you we were talking about the children property, right? So if you take a look, this breaker, this is a child within this component, right? So this gets available as the this is available as the children for, and you can access it using this dot props dot children. Okay, and let's take a look now what happens. 1 2 3, and you can see that now the error is being handled by the fallback component which we have provided. Okay, and we are seeing the error message. So we can have different fallback components for different places within the app as well. So this one is app level, for example, and let's add the error boundary once again. And here we can specify the fallback component is the what did we call it? Yeah, app app level fallback component. All right. So you can have different handlings of the error messages using the fallback component. Suppose I get rid of this one. Let me just comment this out. Okay. What did I do wrong? Okay. And now whenever there's an error, it is showing that this is being handled by the app level one. Okay. So you can have multiple error boundaries, and you can have different fallback components whenever that error occurs, right? Okay, so let me uncomment this now. All right. Um there's also a library available which you can use instead of writing your own error boundary. Um, so it is available. This is the npm package for this npm js react error boundary, and you can install this, right? Where is it? Okay, so you can install it like this, and you can just import this error boundary from your from this package. And here you can specify the error boundary and the fallback component, and there are a few other options as well. So you guys can try this out on your own, but I wanted to show you how you can create your own error boundary, and how you can handle errors within occurring at different levels within your app. Okay, so I have shared the link of that package in the chat, and it's also available in the resources associated with this assignment. All right, so you guys can try this out on your own, this npm package. All right, so let's move on to the next example. So we'll be learning about the use reducer hook. uh, so far we have learned about the use state hook, which allows us to manage state within our component. But there is another hook available which also allows us to manage the state of our component. Let's take a look at how it works. So what I will do is, let me create a counter reducer component. Okay, and what we will be doing is, we'll create a simple counter which basically you know makes use of this reducer. Give me a second. Okay, yeah, so let's do that over here. um, so we have a button. What this is going to do is, we will have a button, one button for increment, and here we'll be displaying the count. We'll create a variable for it in just a bit, and we have another button for reducing this count. Okay, and instead of using the state, we'll make use of this new hook, which is the useReducer hook. All right, so useReducer snippet, and if you see over here, it accepts three arguments. The first thing is a reducer function. So let's create a function called reducer, and it accepts a state and it accepts an action. We'll come back to what these are. Let me just pass the reference of that function over here. The second argument is the initial value for your state. So we will specify the initial value for the state as 0, and um, in case you have some function which is responsible for calculating this initial value, you can pass that function over here as the third parameter. It is optional, so for now we'll leave it out. Okay, and what this hook returns is, it returns the state initialized with the which is containing the initial value which we have provided, and a function known as dispatch. Dispatch allows us to uh, trigger actions which will modify our state, and whenever an action is dispatched, the reducer which we have provided over here, this function will get called, and based on the action which is happening, we can modify our state. And once the state is modified, the app, the component which is using this state, right, it will be re-rendered. So let's see how we can do that. So what we want to do is, let's save this right now first with just this much setup, and here let's go to our main.jsx. Instead of using the app, we will use the, actually, let's do it from here only. Let's comment these two out, and let's add our component here, which is counter reducer. Okay, it says count is not defined. All right, so we need to call this as count instead of state. All right, so we have this these two buttons and the value of count. Okay, and what we want to do is, when we click on this plus, right, the value of count should increase, and we click on minus, the value of count should reduce, decrease. So let's do that. So we'll say on click, increase counter and we will say on click decrease counter, and let's define two functions over here: increase counter and similarly function decrease counter like this. All right, and made a spelling mistake. All right, now what we want to do is whenever we click on the increase counter button, we want to dispatch an action. Okay, and we want to say whenever we call the dispatch function, we pass it an action uh, which is made available to the reducer. So this will basically call our reducer function. The state will be the current value of count, and the action will have whatever we are passing inside the action. So right now we will just pass the value as increase, and here we will pass decrease. Okay, and we will check over here if action equals increase, and what we want to do is we want to return state plus 1. All right, and if action equals else if decrease, we want to return state minus 1. Okay, and otherwise we just return the state as it is. All right, so when we click on this, you can see that the value increased by 1, and when I'm clicking on this it is reducing by 1. So basically we call this dispatch function with the action that we want, the action that needs to happen. And when this function gets called, it will call our reducer with the state, which is the current value of count. So initially it was 0. Then the action, suppose we clicked on the plus button, so the action which is coming from here, that was increase, right? So it will basically increase the value of state by 1, and we are returning that value. And similarly, when we click on minus, we are dispatching a new action. The type of the action is decrease, and over here we are just reducing it by 1. And if none of these are there, we just return the state as it is. Okay, so this is then modifying the state. Whenever the state is modified, this component gets re-rendered and the latest value is made available, right? And whatever is the updated value, that is shown inside this component. Okay, so this is how the useReducer hook works. The advantage of using this is uh, you are moving out the logic of modifying your state outside of your component. Okay, suppose you have a very complex logic for modifying the state, you have many conditions. In that scenario it would be very difficult to do it using the use state hook, right? So you can pass that logic, you can move that logic outside of your component, so your component is just responsible for informing about the actions. The logic as to how the state needs to be updated, that can be moved out of the component. And suppose you have multiple components which have a similar kind of updating logic, so all of that logic can move inside a central function which is outside of the component. So you can basically move this into another file as well. So suppose we create a new file over here, reducer, counter reducer.js, not jx, js. And Here we will just say export default function reducer, and then we can just say import reducer from dot slash not dot slash counter reducer. Okay, and you can see that what is it saying, export default function counter reducer. Hang on a sec. Where did I Okay, give me a sec. Why are we getting this error? It is saying objects are not valid. Where are we returning an object? It's coming from reducer in the reducer component. Wait, what? Okay, give me a sec. Export. Let's not do a default export. Export function reducer, import. Let's just say reducer. This says, or did I make a mistake? Hang on, give me just a second. Export function reducer. We are passing this reducer. Counter reducer.js. Let me just rename this to something else. Okay, I think, yeah. Okay, I think there was some issue with the files having a similar name. Uh, okay, and let me just change it back to export default function reducer, and here we can just say reducer from. Okay, so even this is working. I think there was some issue with the files having, both of the files were having the same name, counter reducer, right? So I think that was causing some sort of an issue. And you can see that we have been able to successfully separate out the logic of how to update the state from the component. And if there is some other component which also needs this logic, it can reuse it. Okay, and now as we are incrementing the value and decreasing it, our reducer will get called and it will accordingly update the state. Okay, so this is a very basic example of the use reducer. So what I mentioned is you can use it to basically anywhere where you can use the use reducer hook wherever you are using a use state hook. So what we will do is we'll create a to do app using the use state hook, and then we will see how we replace that code, how we can modify that code to make use of the use reducer hook. All right. So let's do that now. Let's create uh, to do app dot jsx. All right. So rfc. So we have a to do app, and let's create some initial to dos. Okay. So id is 1. Then the to do is learn javascript, and we have a flag done. Let's just say initially that is false, or rather we can set it to true since we have learned javascript so far in this bootcamp. Let's add a couple of more to dos. And let's give this the id 2 and this one 3, and uh, build Spotify clone using JavaScript, and then we have learn React. Let's set this to false and this one to false as well. Some of you have built it, some of you haven't. Uh, so anyways, these are initial to dos. Let's create next id next id equals 4. Okay. And here what we will do is let's create a component which will be responsible for you know displaying all of these to dos. Before that, let's create a state for this. So const to do and set to dos equals use state, and the initial value is the initial to dos. Okay. And what we will do is we will create some more components over here. So add to do dot jsx. Okay, so this component will be responsible for adding the to dos, and inside this what we will do is we will be having a input. Let's use a fragment. We will have an input of type text, new to do, new to do. Okay, and we will have a button, say add. All right, and whenever we click on this, so this will get a callback. All right, which is on add to do. We will call that uh, function on add to do, and we will just pass it the text that is available to us, uh, the to do text. So for this we will have a state text set text equals use state, and what we will do is we will say on change, we will say set text event dot target dot value, whatever is the value, whatever the user is typing, that should get updated inside this variable, and the default value is the value of text. Okay, all right, and once to do has been added, we want to reset the text to empty, right? So we will call set text with this empty, and let's go back inside our to do app, and let let's have a fragment over here. We'll have a h2 tag, to do's, and we will have the add to do component which has on add to do, and we will pass a function which we will add over here, right? Function handle uh, add to do. So this will get the text, right? The updated to do text, and we will say set tasks, sorry, set to do, and we will pass some values. So id is next id plus plus, and afterwards we need the text, or rather we need the to do, right? To do text, which is the text that we're getting, and we'll set the done flag to false. Okay, so whatever whatever were the so this is an array, right? So whatever were the existing uh, whatever were the existing to do's, let me just call this as to do's. Yeah, whatever the existing to do's, we'll spread through those, and we'll just add this new to do based on the text that we are getting from here, and we will pass this handle to do over here. All right, so we need another component for displaying our to do's, so let's do that. To do to do's dot jsx, rather we need to display this as a list, so to do list.jsx, and this will get the to do's, and on and we want to be able to uh, okay, we'll come to this a bit later on. Let's just try and display a to do over here. So function to do, what we will do over here is we will say we'll get the to do, and we will get the yeah, whatever we are getting, we will display it over here. We'll display just a single to do over here. So we will just say return. Okay, input checkbox done. Wait, should be to do dot id underscore done, or hyphen done. This would be the name. Let's use this as the value for id as well. Okay, and the checked property we will display over here, and that is dependent on to do dot done. Okay, if it's done, then the checkbox will be ticked, otherwise it will not be checked. All right, and we want to display the content, right? So basically you want to display to do dot to do. Actually, what are we calling it over here? We're calling this as the to do, right? Hmm. Let's rename these. Let's just call this as the text. I think that's a much better convention. Okay, and here also we will just say to do dot text. All right, for now let's just display this much, and what we want to do is let's return an unordered list, and we will say to do's dot map. We'll get a particular to do, and we will return an li li, and the key will be to do dot id, and within this we will be uh, having the to do component. Okay, and we'll say to do equals to do. All right, and let's use this over here, to do list, and to do's equals the to do's that we have coming from this state. All right, let's save this, and let's display this component over here. So we'll comment this, and we'll say to do app init cannot. Okay, let's define all of these outside. Okay, so we have something like this. We'll take a look at what that error is. So we have button for, we have this functionality for adding a to do, and we have defined our to do's over here, right? And you can see that the first one is done, so the check box is appearing as checked, and the other two are not done, so they are not appearing as checked. uh, and then we created this add to do, so let's test this out. Build projects using React. Let's click on add. So you can see that basically it so this functionality is present within our add to do, right? And when we clicked on this button, it called the callback which we have defined over here, which is coming from the to do app, and we are passing it the text. And we basically added this new to do to the existing list of to dos that we have. And what is it saying? You provided a prop to a form field without a change handler. This will render okay. We'll handle that when we add more functionality, but you can see right now that we are able to add a new to do, and it is showing up in the list. Let's style this a bit. Let's go to index.css, and where is it? To do list. So class to do list. Let's target this. All right. So we have the to do list, and we'll say list style as none. Okay, so all of those are gone. Then let's see what we can do for these. So let's set display to flex and flex direction to column, and we will say justify content to the center, not to the center, we will say to the start, and align items to the start as well. So you can see all of the to dos have been aligned. Okay. All right, so I think this is good enough, and let's add some spacing between these two as well. Let's create a class, add to do container. Here also we'll say display flex, and let's give a gap of 16 pixels, and let's use this class within add to do. Let's replace this with a div, and we'll say class name add to do container. All right, so I think this is good enough for now. Another to do, yeah, so it is getting added. Now let's build more functionality to this. What we want to do is we want to be able to um, edit a to do, and delete a to do as well. So let's do that now. Let's go inside to do list, and here what we will be doing is this gets on on change, and it gets on delete. Okay, and let's just pass these as it is, because this is where we'll be basically having that logic. And here what we want to do is we want to say on change equals on change, rather let's call this as on, let's rename this to on to do change and on to do delete. And on the change of this we will basically pass the on to do change, right? Whenever the change event occurs we will call this, and on delete we will say on to do delete, right? So whenever we are checking or unchecking this checkbox, we want to update the to do's done status, right? So what we will do is we will say that we will call the function which is getting this event object, and then we will call the on change which it is receiving from the props. And here we will say that we are just spreading over the to do, and we are saying the value of done is uh, the value of event.target.checked. All right, whatever is the value of the checked property, that we will be assigning it over here. Okay, let's save this, and we need to handle this, right? So inside the to do have we will have function handle change, handle to do change. This will get the to do, rather updated to do. Okay, and what we want to do here is once we have the updated to do, we will call the set to do, and we will go through all the to do's. Okay, we have a particular to do, and we will check if the id, okay, of the updated to do is matching this one. In that case we return the updated to do, otherwise we return that particular to do from the list as it is. Okay, let me rename this as existing to do. Okay, and we will pass this to on to do change. We'll say handle to do change, right? Let's test this out, and let's go to the console. Okay, let me check this, and you can see that it is updating this state. When I uncheck this, it is updating that as well, right? So this functionality is working as well. Let me add a particular to do, build to do using React. And you can see it has added that, and we're no longer getting the warning as well. Okay. And similarly, let's add a delete button over here, which will delete that to do. Okay. So let's do that over here. We have to text, and then we have the button. We'll just display a cross over here, and on click we will basically be calling on delete, and we'll just pass it the to do which we are showing over here. All right, and let's go inside. Let's create a function for that function. Handle to do delete. This will get the to do id. Actually, let's pass the to do id over here. To do dot id, and what we will do is we will say set to dos. We will say to dos dot filter to do, where to do dot id not equals the to do id that we have passed for deleting. Okay. All right. So we can see this cross button now, and let me try and remove this one. So it's giving us an error. On delete is not a function. On click, on delete, on to do delete. Did we forget to? All right, so we forgot to add this over here. On to do delete, that is equal to handle to do delete. Okay, now let's try and delete this one. So you can see that it is getting removed, right? New to do. So we have been able to add it, and we are able to remove to dos as well. All right. So we have created a simple to do app which allows us to, which is displaying some to dos, and we're able to mark them complete, and we can remove them as well, and we can add new to dos as well. All right. So we have seen so far how to create a to do app using the use state hook. Now let's take a look at how we can modify this app uh, uh, using the use state hook. All right, it's not the use state hook, the use reducer hook. So the first thing that we will do is we will replace this with the use reducer hook. Okay, and let's write our reducer over here. Function to do reducer, and this is getting the state as well as the action. Okay, and we will pass the to do's reducer over here, and the initial to do's as the initial value for that state. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is we will basically get rid of all of these handle to do change functions and move all of that logic inside our reducer. Okay, so what we will do is let's define that logic over here. Okay, let me for the time being just comment out this logic. And instead of setting the to-dos directly, we'll be calling the dispatch. So we'll say dispatch. Okay, so dispatch. So we want to dispatch an action. So the action that we will be dispatching is we'll provide a type for it. So the type is add, and this is what we'll be passing. We'll be passing the ID and the text. Okay. And let's uh, write that logic over here inside our reducer. So we will just check. We will get the type of the action from the action object, and we will check. We'll use a switch case this time. We will say switch type. Okay. And if the case is add, okay, when that happens, what we want to do is we have our existing state. We will spread through that, and we will create a new entry over here, which will have the act ID as action. You can say const ID comma text. We are getting that from the action, and we will just say ID comma text, and we will say done will be false by default, right? And we will be returning this. Okay, like this. And similarly, so let's see if this part is working. Let's do a refresh. To do reducer is not defined. Okay. All right, so we just added the logic for adding a new to do, right? So build to do app. Let me click on add, and you can see that it was added to this. So this logic we have been successfully able to move inside this reducer. Let's get rid of this. Now let's convert this one, the change logic, right? What we want to do is we want to dispatch another action, set its type to change. Okay. And what we will be passing over here is the to do itself, right, which is nothing but the updated to do. And when that happens, let's add another case for that case. What is it? Change. So we will get the to do from the action. And actually what we can do is we can have the same logic as we had over here. Instead of to do's, or actually we can rename this to to do's, and here we can say to do's dot map. These are all the existing ones, and uh, the updated to do we are getting from the action, right? Action dot to do, and we will check over here. So this logic remains the same, and we will just return this over here. All right, so let's check if this functionality is working. So we are able to do that as well. And the last case is for deleting the to do, right? So let's create an action for that. Dispatch. We'll set the type to remove. Okay, and we will pass the ID as to do ID. All right, and let's copy this. Let's add another case over here. Case remove. When that happens, what we want to do is we want to return to do's dot filter to do. We'll get the const to do id equals actions dot id action dot id, and we don't need this. All right, so we have this over here. Let's try and remove this one. So you can see this logic is working as well. So the point that I was trying to make is wherever you were using a use state hook, you can easily replace that with a use reducer. And there are different, in different scenarios, you can use uh, this hook wherever it is needed. I'll be going forward, we'll look at another use case probably in the next session as to how we can easily as to get a proper, a very good use case for using the use reducer hook. But in the list of resources I have shared a link, you guys can go through that, where you should make use of use state and where you can make use of use reducer hook. All right, and what are the differences between the two? So overall the differences between the two is that this one is getting a reducer function which is responsible for updating the state based on different conditions, and we can easily move out the logic of updating the state outside of the component. The component is just responsible for displaying the state, right, in the UI and updating it. uh, I mean, just this is just responsible for showing the items, right, or displaying the state, whereas we the logic for modifying the state that has been moved outside of the component. And just like we saw earlier that we can take this out and move it in its own file, so we can have to do's reducer.js, and we can say export default to do's reducer, and we can come to our app over here and we can say import to do's reducer from dot slash to do's reducer, like this. And you can see our app is still working. um, Build a to do app using reducer. Let's add this. Let's check this. Let's check this. So you guys can style this app on your own uh, going ahead, but I showed you the two ways by which you can do the same functionality. The first way was using the use state hook, and then we modified that and we made use of the use reducer hook. So in case you guys have any doubts, you can ask me in the chat. Okay, and we'll just take a quick break as well, and then we'll move on to the next topic that we want to learn. So I'm assuming there are no questions, or either you guys are not understanding what is going on. You can let me know whatever is the case, whether you're not understanding it or you have understood it and there are no questions. You can let me know in the chat, okay? If you've not understood what is going on, I can repeat some of the things. Okay, so there is no response. I'm guessing either you guys don't have anything to say or you guys have slept. Okay, so no questions. Fine. Let's move on to the next topic. So, the next thing that we will be learning is the use context hook. But before we learn that, let's understand why we need it in the first place. So, what we will do is let's create an app. Let's call it as context example.jsx. Okay, and what we will do over here is let's create some more components. Function foo. Okay, returns h2, rather h1. This is foo, and let's create another component bar. This one returns heading to, this is bar, and let's create another component as, and this will say return h3. This is pass. Okay, and what we will do over here is this our main component. This has the foo component inside it. The foo component in turn has the bar component, and then the bar component has the baz component. Okay, and let's display this example, context example, and let's comment the Todo App. So you can see we have, this is foo, this is bar, this is baz, right? And this is the parent app. Let's go back over here. Let me change this text to parent app. All right, so this is what this is looking like. Now, what I want to do is, suppose I have an application and I'm displaying the username. So, for example, Gaurav, and parent app says hello username. Okay, so you can see this over here. All right, and then what I want is this bars component. This should also display whatever is the this should also say hello uh, over here to whoever is the currently logged in user. All right, so in order for that to happen, the way this is working is that foo, the parent component has the foo component inside it, and then bars is nested inside bar, which is nested inside foo, right? So we will have to pass this information from this component till this component, right? So let's do that. So we have user, and we'll pass the username over here. uh, let's accept this as a prop, and let's pass this over here, and this is also accepting the user as a prop, right? To make this work, right, to pass this information all the way down to this bash component, we need to pass this information to each of the parent components which are there, right? So user equals user, and then this is also receiving the user, and then here we have what's up user. Okay, so you can see that this is how we were able to pass this pair, this property which is coming from the topmost parent, all the way down to the the innermost child, which is bars, right? So uh, if you take a look at this code, these two components do not actually need this property, right? This user property, they're not using this at all. But because a component, a child component which is nested inside these component needs it, we have to unnecessarily pass the prop down, all the way down from the parent to the child element, even though it is not being used. So this problem, I mean, right now it is fine. You only have like 4 components, but suppose you have like 50 components, and the information is available at the topmost component, and the 49th component, as you're going down, that component needs that information which is available at the topmost, at the parent component level. So can you imagine passing all of this down, or drilling all the way down to the 49th component? So this problem is known as prop drilling, where we are passing the property from the parent to its child, and then so on, right? So this phenomenon, or this property, this problem, is known as prop drilling in React. And using the use context, we can solve this problem that we're getting. So let's take a look at how we can achieve that. So what we will be doing here is that we will be creating a context. Okay, so const user context equals create context, which is coming from React, right? And we'll pass this a default value. So we'll just set the default value as null. Okay, now in order to use this, in order to provide this value, what we will have to do is we will have to wrap all of the children uh, inside this, this context, right? So what we will say is, we'll say user context dot provider. Okay, this is available as a special component. This object, right? On this object, you can access the provider property, I mean the provider, like this. So we say something like use context, whatever name, or whatever is the name of that variable, on that you just say, you just call the provider function, and you provide a value over here. Okay, this is the default value, and we want to pass the username, right? So we pass that over here. This is the value for that, for this user context. Okay, then in order to use this value over here, right, within this, what we will do is, you'll say const user name equals use context. Okay, and we want to use this context, user context, right? We pass that over here, user context. Okay, so whatever value we have set over here, this will be made available to all the components which are which are child of this component. Okay, so whichever components this provider is wrapping, all of those components will have access to this context which is there, right? And in order to use the context, we make use of the use context hook, and we pass it the context that we want to get the value from, right? Okay, and here instead of the user, we will now say username. Okay, so you can see that still we are getting the username that we are passing. Okay, and we can get rid of this now, right? So you can see that this username variable is coming from the context which we have provided over here. So this is the default value, and over here explicitly you're setting the value for this. Now suppose what I want to do is we come over here at the level of bar, right? Here we want to display a different value. Okay, or suppose we have some other context. First let's take a look at we want to provide a different value over here. So what we will do is we will wrap all of this inside a provider. So we'll say user context dot provider, and we will move all of these over here, and here we're changing the value for the context. Instead here we are going to show for example the value as uh, say Joe. Okay, so over here at this level the value of the value was Gaurav, right? By the time we came to this bar component, we had another context provider, and since Baz is nearest to this context provider, now it's reading the value which is provided by this context provider, and it is ignoring the value which is there. So you can have multiple context within your app, and those values can be different. Okay, and whichever context is the nearest ancestor for your component, it will read the context value from that provider. Okay, so since this is the nearest one over here, instead of Gaurav, now it is displaying Joe. Suppose I get rid of this once again, it should once again go back to Gaurav, as you can see over here. All right, so this is how you can have you can have different values of the same context across the application. And just like you can have multiple you can reuse the same context at different places, you can also have multiple contexts. So for example, say let's create another context, say theme context. Okay, create context. We'll say that the default value is dark, and let's use that over here as well. Within here we will say theme context dot provider, and value equals something. Okay, and let's pass this over here. Let's create a state over here, const theme set theme equals use state. So initially it is light, and then what we will do is we'll create a button over here, and we will say toggle theme, and on click what we will do is we will just say set theme. We'll check whatever was the previous value. Previous equals light, then return dark, otherwise you return light. Okay, All right. And what we will do is we will get the theme context. Theme equals use context, theme context, right? And let's see, style. All right. What we will check over here is background, and we will check theme equals light. So in that case, we will set the uh, color to white. Okay. And similarly, otherwise we'll set it to black. And for the color, what we will do is we'll have the same condition. If theme is light, then we will show the color as black. Otherwise, we will show the color as white. Okay. So you can see we had set the where do we have, so you can see that the default value for the theme was dark, right? So the text color is white and the background is black, right? And let's wire this up over here. The value should come from the state, which is the theme, right? And now you can see that the we had in this state we had set the initial value as light, right? So you can see the background for this is white and the text color is black. Now let me click on toggle theme. Now you can see that whenever I click on this button, it is checking if the previous theme was light. If that is this condition was true, then it's setting it to dark, and if not, it is setting it to light, right? And this component is basically using the theme context, and we are just switching the background and the color based on the theme value that we are getting, right? So every time we click on toggle, this background color and color of this component is changing. All right. So you can have multiple contexts as well within your app, and if you do not provide any value over here, it was using the default value, right? So when we had set this to blank, right? So by default it was showing the dark theme, and this was having no impact, right? Because it's no longer considering the value that we have over here. Suppose I use the theme provider over here at the level of 4. I'm saying theme context dot provider, and I'm setting the value explicitly to light. The default value was dark. So you can see that the default value is getting overridden over here because I have provided an explicit value over here, right? And now, even though, let me put the theme back over here, even though I am toggling this is having no impact because this is having a fixed value over here. So let's get rid of this once again, and this needs to be wrapped in a fragment. All right, and you can see once again that this toggle theme button is working. Okay, so this is the benefit of using the use context hook, that you can provide the value. You can, this basically creates a data layer for you, and using the create context function provided by React, you create a context, then you provide that context value using the provider component, which is available directly, right? You provide a value over here, and you can change that value using your a state hook or something like that whenever you're making change to that value, wherever that value is being used. So to use the context, you make use of the use context hook, and you provide the context that you want to listen to. Whenever the value of the context changes, right, your component, the component which is using that context, it will be re-rendered. All right. So this is how you can make use of the use context hook. And the benefit is that it solves the problem of prop drilling, and it allows different components, components which are nested deep within your app to have access to this data. So it is kind of, you know uh, it is doing something like this. We have the parent, and then within this we have the child, which in turn has another child, subchild, right? And at this same level of the child, we have, a sibling, right? So using the context, we can define a context at this level. And all of that is basically accessible to all of the components over here, right? So you can think that, this is a vertical component which is available throughout all the throughout the app, right? If you define the context over here, you provide the value for the context over here, it is available to all the child components irrespective of where they are placed, right? And prior to context, you would be, providing all of this using props. Okay. So you can think of your context as a data layer which allows you to share data across different components irrespective of where they are positioned within the app. Okay. So this is the advantage of using this hook. It allows you to share the data, and it solves the problem of prop drilling. And you can read more about it in the resources which have been shared in the session associated with this uh, in the assignment associated with this stream on the Devsnest website. Okay. So uh, in case you have any doubts, you can ask me. So there's a question, which one should we use for the to do app? You can use the reducer hook, uh, right? There's no problem in using either one of those in this case. It was a pretty straightforward app. You could have gone with any one of them. Uh, but where this would be really beneficial is where, suppose you have another to do app, and you can basically you have extracted out the updating logic in a separate reducer, right? And then you can reuse that file across your different components or different apps. Okay. uh, so I mean, it depends from use case to use case. It depends on the complexity. Right now this was fairly simple, so we could have used the use state hook also. But if uh, you have a very complex logic or a very lengthy logic for figuring out how to update the state, you can definitely make use of the use reducer hook in that scenario. um, as we build more projects, you will understand where it makes sense to use the use reducer hook and where to just stick to the use state hook. We'll be building more complex projects in just a few sessions. There it'll be pretty clear as to uh, when to make use of the reducer hook and when to use the state hook. All right. um, so this is it for today's session. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And in case you have any more doubts, we'll meet in the Discord voice channel. All right. And I'll see you guys day after tomorrow. Until then, take care and goodbye.